What does it mean to bring your whole self to work? There's a lot of companies that ask you to do that. Are you doing that in a way that's in alignment with your values? Are you doing it in a way that is consistent with the support systems you've built for yourself, both internally and externally? These are some of the questions that we're going to be answering today in my conversation with Miroo Kim. I met Miroo at the Wisdom 2.0 conference in San Francisco in April 2023. We had a great connection. She came out to the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit in Boulder in June of this year. And, I find her such a deep thinker, and I really enjoyed talking with her about what it's like to work for big companies like Apple and Facebook and Microsoft, and what it's like to go out there and be a solopreneur and blaze her own trail. So really fascinating conversation all around how we show up for ourselves. Welcome back to The Conscious Entrepreneur, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey, Miroo, great to have you here. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So you are the founder and CEO of People and Culture, and you have been in San Francisco, Silicon Valley for a long time. You've been with really big fancy companies like Apple and Microsoft and Facebook, or Meta as it's now called. And you've had a lot of really interesting roles. And I wanted to start out the conversation because I know that it's a big deal to work at those companies, right? And there's a lot of prestige, there's a lot of interesting projects, there's a lot of really fun stuff that you can work on. Obviously, also fairly high stress environments, as we know. And I noted that you talked about an episode that you had coming back on the bus from work one day and basically breaking down and crying the entire time as you were traveling from your office to your home.
Yeah.
And that was a major inflection point for you in your career and how you think about yourself. And tell me what you learned about yourself. Tell me what was going on for you, and tell me how that helped then to reshape how you were spending your time and energy.
Thank you. Wow. You're bringing me to the dark place right away from get-go. That's good. So that was I remember that there was a time when I was commuting on our commuter bus from Meta campus, the Facebook campus in Menlo Park to San Francisco. And I remember that actually the context was I was coming out of a meeting, the big meeting with the product lead about the product that I was working together with. And there it was a kind of everything. It was a tone of the meeting. It was what we were talking about. And then, but that was more superficial. I think what was underneath was that, there were a lot of sort of instability in terms of how we were behaving to each other. And I constantly felt that felt hurt, at workplaces. And also maybe I had to behave in the same way so that I can kind of toughen up and be strong against other people, but that's not how I want it to be. So I think that was a kind of more direct kind of a reason what made me kind of really break down and cry. But at the same time, there were more fundamentally deeper reason too, that I wasn't sure whether I was doing the right thing for myself. There was a lot of questions internally. And there were also kind of personal thing that I had a history of depression too. So there was another thing that also coming in very deeply from internally inside me too. So it was kind of everything kind of came together and it was basically, I was having a really bad day, so to speak. And then it just kind of made me break down on the shuttle. And I feel bad for the person who was sitting next to me, because he probably had no idea why this woman is kind of crying all the way. And that was actually when I felt that I need to do something about kind of my environment, meaning that I was already practicing my meditation and I was getting therapy, right? And I also was doing all kinds of sort of self-hack that I should do myself to make me feel good. Yet when I came to work or when I interact with people, that everything kind of gets upset, no matter what I do. So that's when I realized that maybe, and it's not that it's no one's fault. It's no individual's fault. It's not necessarily the fault of the product lead, or it's not the fault of my team, but it's almost like, people, there was no support system at work to actually meet these kind of individual sufferings that are so present all the time. So how can I actually have the culture around me that can meet my suffering and also other people's suffering in a better way. That was really what kind of started me off with my journey, basically. And yeah, so I'll pause there if you have any other questions that you want to ask.
So until that time, you were doing, I guess I would just call it like quote unquote like a normal job, meaning you had your responsibilities, you were sort of doing stuff, and then after that, you got really involved in the mindfulness at work projects and mindfulness at work themes, right? So was that the specific inflection point where you're just like, all right, enough of this, I've had enough, and I need to change? And what was the process like to take, at a big company like Facebook, Meta, what was the process like to introduce these topics and to wind up supporting mindfulness at work initiatives?
Yeah. So that was the moment that I should do something. And I got really involved in the mindfulness at Meta. So that's the employee-run grassroots club. And it was a very small club at the time. But then also what I wanted to do was that it's not enough to just to individual practice. How can you practice together? How can you learn these concepts together? How can you learn how to be compassionate to each other better? And so I signed up for this training that I can actually bring to work at Meta. So some of the trainings I got trained was Search Inside Yourself, that was developed at Google, and then compassion cultivation training that was developed at Stanford. And I started offering that as part of this mindfulness club activity program. So it was, and I was still doing my full-time job, right? My full-time job as a business development manager. And it was really out of this desperation that there's gotta be a way, because so many people are spending so much time at work and we cannot keep going like this. And I assume that there are a lot of people who are like me who are suffering the same way. So, and I was correct. In the process of offering the program through the Mindfulness Club, and I met a lot of them who are secretly suffering but not showing. They were putting this facade that I'm okay. And then I care about my career. I want to get promoted and I want to make this much money. I want to be director, VP at a certain. There were those people, but then secretly they're dying, so to speak, in a kind of dramatic way. And I met a lot of them. I remember one time running as part of the Mindfulness Club, we were running the meditation weekly. We're offering it, and anybody could come. It was a walk-in, and we would do it like in a meeting table, right? We're not cross-legged sitting, but there will be some guidance too. I remember one time the one person came in. I have never met that person before. He came in and he sat, and then I guided the meditation at the time, and he started like crying, sobbing, for 30 minutes. And then after that, we usually have a kind of little chat, but he said basically, I really needed that today. I needed to be kind of received and to be spacious. So thank you. And he left, and he didn't come back for that after that. But, it kind of was an example that everybody's suffering, right? Everybody's going through something. And we say at work at the time, Meta, that people say, bring your whole self to work. If you expect people and tell people to bring whole self to work or authentic self to work, there's gotta be a system that actually really can contain that whole self. And because whole self contains all that suffering, from the previous, the personal life and all that too, right? So yeah, so kind of long story short, basically from that point and onward was a 5 years of journey of offering these programs and growing this community too. And the community was like very small, like 800 people maybe in the beginning. And then throughout the COVID, especially during the pandemic, it grew a lot because the suffering was so immense. So it ended up being like 3,000 people community over 4 years time frame. So it was a huge, it was just so remarkable to see that there are so many people who are feeling the same way and they're willing to actually practice together. And then there are a lot of actually their needs of their suffering to be met in that way was actually really, it was there. And then we were able to meet their suffering too. So, and personally, what they really taught me was that I was able to actually do my full-time job and doing that successfully. And it wasn't too much work. You might think that I was do kind of a dual job and then it's more stressful. It wasn't more stressful. It was less stressful. And that was something that kind of I still take it with me wherever I go, like some sort of a personal transformation that oh, when I have that kind of a sense of well-being, not just within myself, but also with other people around me in the community, it just carries me away. It supports me so much. So that was the support system that I experienced, and I was driving it with my professional career, getting promoted like 3 times in a row during the time. I didn't focus on that. That was my focus, to be honest. And then the people around me were, so to speak, getting the sense of well-being, and we were able to kind of work better and then also live better too together. So yeah, so that was basically a summary of what happened after that. Cry on the bus.
It's so cool to be able to link back, your professional success with the personal work that you do, and to be able to say, yeah, because of the stuff I was doing, it didn't feel like an extra job. I felt more relaxed, even though I was technically, I assume you were doing more work. There was more hours spent at the office, but you're still able to feel relaxed and therefore get more done, be more accomplished. And, a lot of people don't link those. They don't understand. They see it as a trade-off. It's I'm either doing the mindfulness thing or I'm this hard-nosed professional, but I can't do both. And one of the things that we talk about a lot at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, for example, is not only can you do both, you have to do both. Yes. And so you're like a living example of that. And it blows my mind that there were 3,000 people at Facebook in this mindfulness club. So obviously it's a big deal, touching a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I cannot agree with you more about that. We have to do it, and it's not good to have. It's not something that you do it when you have time. It's so necessary. And for the entrepreneurship too, I'm learning that, like, as we go every day, like, oh, this support system is so necessary. So yeah, I'm thinking that it's a lived experience, and I felt the experience that I can actually really remember and then really feel. So that's something that I try to remember and remind myself too.
Well, that's important, and I know that you call yourself a quote unquote rookie solopreneur. So having left the big cushy confines of tech companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook, and now doing things on your own. So what's that like? What was that transition like for you? And what are you learning now about yourself in the entrepreneurial role?
Yeah, it's a great question. And also it's a question that I keep asking myself, and I have new answers every day too. It's not easy. But also it wasn't easy to work in the big corporate. One thing that wasn't easy is that kind of sense of, when I didn't have that support system, when I didn't identify it, and because when I look back my corporate career, 20 years of Apple, Meta, and Microsoft, I don't think I lived through that most of the career with any support system. I didn't have an internal support system until later. I didn't also explicitly think about this external support system too. But then I was kind of living by the agenda that was kind of given to me, imposed on me, and that I took without consciously thinking too much whether that's actually for me or not. And so that was difficult part. And then entrepreneurship right now, I'm trying to be conscious, and that's why I really loved your summit, because it was a reminder. It was a great reminder, good practice with the like-minded people about what it means to be a conscious entrepreneur. And as I'm trying to do it, there are a lot of things that I took for granted at being in the corporate, right? A lot of support, infrastructure, and a lot of things I need to I didn't have to think about. Now I have to think about it too. So it's difficult in that way, but then it's more fulfilling because I feel so aligned with the work that I'm doing now. I get to spend 100% of my time on the things that I really care about. So that part is really awesome. I think one of the biggest learning lately has been the measure of success. And what I mean by that is, I noticed that until recently, I was actually applying the same measure of success that I was applying to myself when I was at corporate to my entrepreneurship too. Meaning that, and I have a business plan too, right? So I have a certain target, but then as I look at it, that if I don't meet the business target on a certain time, then, it looks like a failure. But then that's usually how I would view my career at Meta, like being a certain level or getting a certain kind of a salary or compensation. or how to see my project kind of moving. That was kind of a level measure of success that I had in Meta that was given to me too again. But now I'm realizing that I cannot apply the same level measure of success, because the reason I chose entrepreneurship over that my corporate job was to be working on the things that I feel really aligned with. So then the measure of success should actually reflect that. I cannot just ignore that the satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with working in alignment with my values, thinking that that's good to have, and then the kind of taking it out of this measure of success too. So I need to actually include that as part of the measure of success. So having realized that, I now feel like, oh, I get to remind myself that why I decided to do this, first of all, and also being able to kind of evaluate my work in a more fair way. So I might not be able to make the money that I was making, to be honest, I guess, in terms of pure income compared to Meta. But does that mean that actually my entrepreneurship is a failure as a result of that? It's not, right? Because I get to have a dissatisfaction from working on alignment with my values. So I need to really factor that into this measure of success. So that's something that I'm kind of I got recently realized, and then kind of reset my expectations, and then really balance it out with my intention.
Yeah, the measure of success is critical. And I'll just mention as a side note, you would not be the first entrepreneur to sit there and ask yourself, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Can I go back? Can I just go back to the big company? I think every entrepreneur asks themselves that, probably on a fairly frequent basis. But in terms of, how you're measuring success, can you put a dollar amount on living in alignment with your values? Can you put a dollar amount on the work that you're doing being fulfilling? Can you put a dollar value on the fact that you are the one who is success or failure, for example?
Yeah.
And so responsibility. Yeah. Those are all critical elements of it as well. So what else have you seen on the measurements of success? So it's not so much spreadsheet based as it used to be, I guess, huh?
Yeah, it's not. But also, one of my job as a business development professional was that also kind of quantifying, and then thinking about the goals and the quantifying the goals too. And it will show up in many different ways, that how I feel, how much I feel healthier, not just mentally, but also emotionally and also physically. The way to quantify is probably the medical bills that would come out of it too, or the amount of money I spent on massage, thinking that there's a problem with my muscle, but actually the problem was with my inner being. So there are a lot of ways to quantify. So I'm happy to do that too. But yeah, I think a lot of it is actually unmeasurable in a way. And I think that's why when I look at the system, in the corporate system, in the kind of cultural well-being, that's not being, even though everybody understands that's important, but nobody is really prioritizing it in the system-wise too. There is a book called The Good Life. I think it was based on the longest longitudinal study by Harvard, that tracked the person's life. I think it was like 400 people. They tracked the entire life, and then trying to really understand what were the components of the good life, right? And then I think that the learning was that it's a relationship that's really critical for the good life. We all know this. There is no one who doesn't know it. We know that the secret to success, secret to happiness is good relationship, a meaningful kind of work and all that. But when you actually see people around, there are not many people who are actually practicing it. And why? It's because that these measure of success, feeling kind of having the satisfaction that you have from the good relationship, things like that are not really measurable, so to speak, quantifiable. And then as a result, we kind of take that out from the evaluation. So I don't know if the answer is to quantify it necessarily. Maybe that's one way. But the other thing is that to really proactively think about how do I take that as part of my self-evaluation of the life or work, and create our own kind of measure of success. And instead of kind of adopting what was given to us. So I think personally, the big learning is that I need to think about the measure of success in my context, because it's my situation different from other people. And then really not take other measure of success as given.
What I remember from that book, The Good Life, is that your life satisfaction at age 80 is roughly determined by how invested and committed you were to your relationships at age 50, if I remember that correctly. Meaning,
yeah, that's right.
These things they're cumulative, and so over time, it builds on itself. You can't just turn around at age 75 and say, "Hey, I want to be happy. I'm going to start, building relationships," because it's much harder to do at that point. And so
exactly.
If you're doing it and you're building a habit around it and you're investing your time and energy in those relationships, then it does really help you in that stage of life. So yeah, I remember that. That was a really cool book about relationships, and it's a really, really interesting study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned internal support system and external support system a couple of times. Do me a favor and define what you mean. And on top of your definition, like where you see people trip up when it comes to these concepts.
Yeah. So this was kind of also kind of lesson from a lesson that I learned hard way through the failure of my own too. So internal support system, I define it as, so the support system, the concept, I actually thought about it after encountering James Clear, The Atomic Habits. And when people read that book, they focus on the habit and habit building. But actually what really caught my eyes was the system. Because I think he takes an example of the Olympic athletes, right? So if you go to Olympic athletes, let's say track game, there are 8 track runners. And only like 3 of them will win the medal. If you're an Olympic level athlete, then you're top of the class, right, in the world. And they have all the same goal. They want to win the medal. That's why they're in Olympics too. But what makes the 3 out of the 8 people actually win the medal? It's not because of the goal, right? It's because of the system. And I think that was really important. We are so living in such a goal-driven culture that we don't think about how support the system is so critical. So that's when I started really actively thinking about what is my support system? What is my system around that really it supports me to live the life in the way I want and the work in the way I want. And I realized that there are internal and external. Internal is, for me, is the kind of taking care of my inner being, which is a lot about the contemplative practices that I do. And for me personally, learning is a very important value. So that I can keep satisfying the needs for growth. So the contemplative practice and learning are 2 important parts of the support system for me internally. And then external support system, I define it as you can think of it as a community, but basically the external kind of people or the thing that can actually remind us of the values that are really important to us, and also helps us stay resilient in the face of hardships. And so those could be the friends network, could be family network, or in the work context, it could be collaborators or the workers or mentors. So that's an important part. And I do, in my program that I actually offer, that I actually suggest to the entrepreneurs to do 2 things. One, in terms of external support system. One is that create your own board of directors. So, you have board of directors for your business, but for you personally, create that too. And these people would be group of people who really care about you, but who are not necessarily invested in your kind of success directly, but they really care about you. So meet with them every quarter, like you're doing the board meetings for your company. But if the business in this context will be you, and then kind of set the agenda and ask them for feedback that are not invested in their own interest too, that are open and very honest, right? So that's one thing that one of the things that I actually suggest the entrepreneurs to do as part of the external support system. And I do have that too. My board of directors are changing too sometimes, but they're always there. And then it feels so amazing that I have people that I can go back to and ask for that kind of their advice. And I don't have to take it necessarily, but it's just so immensely helpful.
And so what's the other part of the external support system? You said go find your own board of directors, and you said there was another one?
Yeah, there's another one I call coaching circle. And the name could be different too, but it's basically a circle of people who are in the same field, who are who can commiserate together at the same time, who can support each other. But then the rule is not necessarily to solve each other's problem. It's actually to really be there and then be compassionate to each other, and then coach each other, basically. So, I think people have it one way or another, through their friends network or through the collaborators too. Whatever that might be, it's really important to have that coaching circle. And in my program, I actually asked them to formalize a little bit by kind of making sure that you meet regularly so that you can keep going. And then there's certain agenda that I asked them to think about. Like, again, it's not about solving anybody's problem, but really being there for each other, being present. So that's really important point about the coaching circle too. So I think I have coaching circle in various forms now in my career and in my personal life as well too.
Yeah, the coaching circle is so interesting because as professionals and as entrepreneurs, we're always wanting to jump in and solve problems. Oh, I hear this, and I want to bring in my experience and show you how smart I am and, solve the problem. And, it's kind of like when you're an entrepreneur and you're going out raising money and meeting with VCs and, you present your business and then they ask you questions that, they're not dumb questions, but they're very surface questions. And it's like, yeah, man, like I've thought about that 150 times, like, but thank you for your question. And so it's a little bit the same way. Like sometimes, so with a peer group or coaching circle, you just need people to listen because you've thought through everything, the pros and cons and so on. And just having people around to reflect back or help you find your blind spots in your thinking, as opposed to actually solving the content of the problem. It's more like, what's the context here? And how are we working and how are we operating? I've always gotten tremendous value out of those kind of things. And it's,
exactly.
Groups like EO, YPO, Vistage, those things can do a really good job with it. And I've done my own in the past, but we would sometimes forget the no advice thing and we would jump into problem solving mode. And then, the funny thing is when we did that, everybody would feel less satisfied about the meeting. Right. So everybody feel when we jump into like, oh yeah, I'm going to go do this. Everyone would sort of feel like, yeah, it was okay. The meeting was okay. As opposed to when we're just supporting one another as best as we can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's this is kind of some thought-provoking point that I learned recently. So humans, our brain can understand about 600 words a minute. So our brain can process 600 words a minute, but we can only speak about 150 words a minute on average. So why are we evolved to have this gap, right? Clearly our brain can understand more and process more, but we are not able to speak that much. So, and I don't think this is actually a malfunction or malfunction in the evolution. There's a reason why. That means actually we listen from the silence, we listen from the facial expression, we listen from this nonverbal, language, right? And listen from whatever is the presence from the person too. But then from the person who's speaking or who's being listened to, there's a tremendous tremendous satisfaction or the sense of well-being that comes from being listened to that way. So yeah, I think that's so right. I had the same experience that people who in a very active problem solving sessions, and there are sessions that are really dedicated for that too. But in this context, when you're given the chance for people to really be listened to, that satisfaction is actually nothing compared to anything else, or even better sometimes than the problem solving sessions. Yeah.
So personal board of directors, how does that work? Give me some of the details. How many people am I inviting and how often do I see them? And am I doing it all together? Like we're all going out to dinner or am I doing it one-on-one?
So I usually recommend, and I have like 4 to 5 people. 5 people seems like the right number of people. And then I try to kind of get together every one of them, like if the schedule allows, every quarter. And but if not, then it's okay to also have one-on-one, but checking in every quarter with every one of them, or the people who you think that you want to talk to them out of those board of directors. And I try to be really, really kind of a structure in terms of the agenda, and then the agenda would be like what I'm really struggling with right now, and then kind of really have a deep thought about it, and then bring that kind of a struggle to this board of directors, and then share their ask them to share their perspective. The rule here is that it doesn't. What I guess it's also a different thing from the regular board of director meeting is that it's not, you don't have to act on it necessarily. You can take it with a grain of salt. And then also, so there's a certain freedom that I don't have to act on it. But at the same time, usually because there's no responsibility, like obligation, the advice feels more somehow like better than actually what I was thinking. And so the important part here is that they're not actually working directly on the work that I'm doing. So there's a certain distance, so they can actually be much more honest and frank too. So in my case, for the board of directors, what I'm really looking for is that they're really candid feedback that can make me feel more courageous. That's what I ask for. So it's also important for me when I ask for the feedback or advice that kind of what I'm asking for them as a challenge for myself too. So one of the areas that I really struggle a lot is that kind of self-compassion, and then feeling confident about what I do. And I really try to bring that up, and then how can I actually help myself to see myself as is without actually discounting too much. And then my board of directors would actually really give me honest feedback about it, and then really correct me whenever I actually make any kind of verbal mistakes, or like, any decisions that I make in that way. Then they would actually really point that out, and I can take it more honestly and then openly than other actually people's feedback.
I know that learning is a big value for you, and you mentioned a couple minutes ago how important it is for entrepreneurs to find their values, to identify their values. How did you go through that yourself, and what are your recommendations?
So I have an interesting, so I think it's through there are two value exercises I do. One of them is actually I've learned a long time ago, taking the Search Inside Yourself training. And when I first took the training, it was like 2016 or 17. And one of the part of the exercise was to write the value based on the people that I admire. So if I ask anyone, what's your value? It's really hard to answer the question because, maybe it's love. It could be very superficial too, but not feeling really connected to it. But if I ask anyone, who do you admire? Who do you respect the most? And they'll say, oh, my dad or my grandfather or my teacher from the third grade. They can actually talk about it on and on. And then if you think about like, okay, there are 5 people that I admire, and then what are the things that these people share as qualities, then that can actually speak to my values too. So I did exercise a while ago, but in that time, 26 for the first time. And for the first time in my life, I realized, oh, these are my values that I really care about. It might not manifest in my life right now, but I really deeply care about it. So I do that exercise regularly because it also changes too. It depends on the circumstances or life stages. So that's something that I try to really think about and then really kind of ground myself on. And if I see that I'm kind of what I'm doing or what I think about, where I want to go is actually not really in line with it, then I kind of ask myself why. Maybe there's a reason, but so it doesn't have to be always like perfect alignment. But I think having the value is almost like it works as a kind of compass. It kind of gives me how far I am off from where I want to be. And then if there's a gap, then, what the reason is for the gap. So it really makes me be conscious about or intentional about what I do and how I do things. The other thing that I do recently was that in the workshop, one challenge for this value exercise, or based on that kind of thinking about the future that we really envision, one challenge is that our inner critic keeps like coming in sabotaging us that no, you'll never be able to live in alignment with your values. You'll never be able to like live up to your dream, whatever. That's so, for me, it's very active. And there are a lot of people who are actually have a very active saboteurs internally. So what I started actually incorporating into the program that I actually run is that using the ChatGPT too. So using the AI, as you ask with the proper prompts, and ask the AI to can create the feature that you want, actually does do it, because ChatGPT doesn't have the ego at the moment. So it doesn't filter anything. It doesn't censor. It just, okay, based on your inputs that you want, this is a feature that you want. So I did an exercise recently about imagining that I give myself that I give a TED talk in 5 years, and imagining that everything goes in the way that I want it. And here are the things that I hope that I can do. And then I wouldn't be able to write my own TED talk based on that, because I keep like judging myself. But GPT-4 were able to do it beautifully. And I was reading and I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. Yes, this is what I want. So there's also another way to get the support from the technology. And I think this was one good usage of the artificial intelligence.
So ChatGPT doesn't have the baggage that humans do, or to put it another way, it has a beginner's mind.
Yeah, beginner's mind. I like that.
Yeah. That's really interesting. The values exercise that I've done in the past is based on John DeMartini's book, The Values Factor.
Yeah.
And really interesting. So one of my core values is freedom. And I find that anytime I'm not doing something that's, helping me pursue that path, it gets very full of friction. And even just laying them out and being clear on what they are is extremely helpful, more as a method of making decisions or being aware of where I'm spending time. Not necessarily that we can be doing it 100% of the time, but more, okay, I see it and I see when I'm in or out of alignment. I can also feel if my energy is going up or if my energy is going down based on that as well. So I think that's a really powerful thing. And, many entrepreneurs, they value freedom. Many entrepreneurs value creativity. So learning and growth, for example, are really important. Obviously, a lot of entrepreneurs are also looking for wealth and money and abundance, which is an important one. And so those are the ones that I've seen come up most often. And if you live in them, then great, you can sort of be guided by that. And if you're not, then you have this invisible thing, running you, and you're wondering why you're out of alignment or why you're feeling a certain way. Yeah,
exactly. One thing that kind of, as I listen to you, one thing that comes up for me is that, entrepreneurship, people think about it, the bright side of it. And there are a lot of good bright sides too. But 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 startups where the entrepreneurship goes to, only those are successful. And then most of them are successful as in terms of financial success. So it's not my measure of success necessarily, entirely. But if you look at the startups, it's a harsh environment, and it's actually not the logical decision to make if you're thinking about, I'm going to live a sustainable life. So there's a lot of pain in it too. And as they do that, I think it's really important to think about what as you talked about, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And does this actually matter for me? And if the answer becomes no, then actually, we should be able to kind of stop. But yeah, a lot of people actually sometimes can go like kind of autopilot. And that's not how we want to be, in life in general. So yeah.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the main trade-off that the entrepreneur is making is, am I living a meaningful life?
Yeah.
So just as background, I got my MBA from INSEAD in 2005. So that was 18 years ago. I've been an entrepreneur for most of that time, doing several different projects. And I have peers, friends of mine, who are in the same job, right? Or maybe not same job, but same company since we got our MBAs in 2005. And to them, it probably meets their values and kind of what they want to be doing in the world. But to me, that would not work at all, right? If my value is freedom and creativity and growth, and those are my recipes for a meaningful life, then I have to be viewing it through that lens. And
Yeah.
there are going to be trade-offs that exist in the world, and it's like, fine. And most entrepreneurs will say, I accept those trade-offs. In fact, I cherish those trade-offs. I want to do that, because I want to be in command of my life.
Yeah, exactly. There was in one of the programs that I facilitated, that there was a question from the VC investors. He was telling me, in the world where there is a successful entrepreneur such as Elon Musk, I'm kind of conflicted what I should encourage my portfolio company founders. He's clearly successful for the work, and then he works 100 hours a week, and he sleeps on the floor of his office. So seems like that's a good formula. And so I cannot really say that, take care of yourself because that will pay off. And I had to tell him that, well, you don't know whether actually that's the secret to his success. If you look at the business that says Tesla or the SpaceX, he gets a lot of government subsidy too. So he's in a good system actually for the business that he wants to run. And of course, it's driven very smart, but there's nothing he can do by himself. He needs collaborator, he needs employees, he needs teams to work together with. So that's something to think about. What is actually the direct reason for his success? It's not necessarily because of what he's doing necessarily. And does that matter to you? Like, do you want to live like that? Do you want your portfolio company founders be living that kind of a life and then successful? Is that what you care about? And he said, no, I want them to be happy in it. So then it's not yours. So yeah, but then I think a lot of times in our industry, like tech, not beyond actually entrepreneurship, in tech industry, there's almost like a one narrative that's so dominant, and people think that that's the only way to go, and that should really stop. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the hustle culture narrative. And if you think back, so you were at the Conscious Entrepreneurship Summit.
Mm-hmm.
I need to say that again. You were at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit in June,
mm-hmm.
and you
mm-hmm.
remember there was that discussion with the VC panel. So it was Matt
mm-hmm.
McCall of Forge Capital. It was Tim Chang of Mayfield and Lisa Mickelson of Flourish Ventures. And they're sitting there saying, hey, we need to be supporting the full picture of the entrepreneur. We need to let them drop this idea that, working yourself to bare bones is what it's all about. We need
mm-hmm.
to not be in adversarial relationships with the founders that we support. We need to be in supportive relationships with the founders that we support. We need to help them do their work. And
mm-hmm.
one of the reasons is right now you're only working on a certain snapshot. You're only working on a certain project, but you're a whole
mm-hmm.
person and you have a past, a present, and a future.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might have an experience now, but as a VC, if I'm pushing them and I break the relationship and it doesn't work, I may not have access to whatever they do in the future. And if I can help them be great now and be even greater in the future, then what does that do for my returns? So it's really mm-hmm. interesting at the event to hear, really accomplished and serious VCs talk about that and what that means to them. And so I think that comes back to your point. You're looking at an entrepreneur and we always see these entrepreneur hero stories, right? Oh yeah,
mm-hmm.
I just, I worked till I was almost dead and look at how successful I am and so on and so forth. And it's like, well, yeah, but look at the destruction you left in your wake, or look at what happened to your health or your marriage or your, mental health or whatever it is, as you were going through that. And seeing the full picture, I think, is such a critical element.
Yeah, well said. And that was actually the session, one of my favorite sessions from the summit too. I talked to a lot of VCs too, so that I can kind of bring this sense of well-being, cultural well-being to the startup communities and the portfolio companies, etc. Not as a good to have, but as a must have, and in a way, kind of critical ingredient for their return on investment too. But then I actually meet a lot of VC investors who are deeply caring about it. And there are not that many yet, but there are definitely some of them. And then it was really good to see them actually talking about it really consciously there. And I think that's really kind of speaking to the conscious entrepreneur that you and every speaker was bringing together at the summit. That when I think of a conscious entrepreneur, the kind of a quote that I will always remind myself of is that Bill O'Brien, so the former CEO of the Hanover Insurance, he said the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. And you can replace intervention or intervener as entrepreneurship too. Success of an entrepreneurship depends on the interior condition of the entrepreneur too. And I think it's so true. And then when you are conscious of that, when you're really aware of the interior condition and then really cultivate it, then everything kind of flows from that place really well. Like some people think that conscious entrepreneurship as something like a moral, from the moralistic perspective, that you do the right thing, like ethical decisions. That's part of it, but that's partial. But when one is actually really deeply rooted with and aware of the interior condition, then we get to make the ethical decisions very naturally, and we get to make decisions for more collective, not just for myself. So yeah, I think, and it needs actually everybody's support, including the VCs. So that session was really critical for me from the summit.
That's a great definition of conscious entrepreneur. So say that one again. Give us the soundbite version of that, and remind me of the person who said it.
Yeah, so it's called the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. It's by the former CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien. So he turned around Hanover Insurance, and he was one of those leaders that I really admire in the business world.
And obviously someone who worked on themselves.
Yeah, clearly.
If he's a big believer in the internal condition. And so as we wrap up here, Miroo, what are some of the things that you do for your internal condition? You mentioned that you meditate. You've obviously had a major series of career changes recently, but what are your daily support systems for you?
So I do meditate. So the first thing I do is meditation. And again, system wise, I create a very easy system. So right next to our bed in our bedroom, that there's a cushion. So I just go right sit. So there's no hesitation, nothing that stops me. I do meditate, and also I do yoga. I've been practicing yoga for longer than actually meditation too. So that's my kind of body movement. And I love running. So running is a form of meditation for me too, like just getting in the flow. And I think it's important to also kind of have some sort of art form. And I recently reconnected with writing. Writing has been always the form of art that I really deeply connected with. So I love writing, and that's also practice for the interior condition. And the most important, and again, like you remind me of the importance of this in the summit, the community. So, and it's not just about being busy by connecting with many different people. It's really about finding the people that I feel genuinely connected with in terms of what I care about, and then really keep kind of cultivating the relationship with them by either contributing to them or helping each other, or also getting help from them too. So that community is also another support system that I really need and help for my interior condition. So that's the external side, but it's an important part of me.
And I like the way you call that out. Community is not the same as networking. So
no,
not the same. Now, when it comes to your meditation, it sounds like you're a morning person. What kind of meditation do you do? How long do you meditate for?
I do in the morning. I usually do about 20 to 25 minutes. And I've been practicing, in terms of mindfulness, I've been practicing inside meditation. So, but it's most of the days, it's usually like watching my thought. Oh, that thought came up. Okay, that's interesting. And just watching my thoughts as it kind of pops up. That's really my practice. I do kind of a settling with the breath practice too in the beginning. So yeah, that's breath and then watching my thought. That's really all there is. Trying to keep it simple.
Great. And I know you just did this 30-day writing challenge, like you were saying, reconnecting to the art that you like. So you put a lot of stuff out there. I know you're a big reader and love to learn to improve yourself. Mm-hmm. What are some of the top books or resources that you recommend to people who are trying to become more conscious and aware entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I was thinking about this for a bit. There's a get fascinated by the entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurship. It doesn't mean that I get fascinated by me, but I think that the whole human history is basically history of entrepreneurship. If you think about it, there are a lot of things that humans started doing from everything that humans started, like it's an entrepreneurship too, I think. So, the book that I recently read that I'm actually still reading, that's so fascinating to me, is called What Makes Us Human. It's written by Ian Thomas. He's a poet, and Jasmine Wang. She's an entrepreneur and also the AI researcher. And also the third author is a GPT-3. So these two humans collaborated with GPT-3. What they wanted to write about is that asking GPT-3 questions about spirituality. And so they trained GPT-3. This is before GPT-4 came out, so that's why it was 3. And they trained GPT-3 with a text from a religious text, such as the Bible, Quran, Torah, and the Buddhist scriptures. It trained the GPT-3 and then basically asked a lot of questions about spirituality, such as why do we suffer? Why do we die? Like what happened? How can you explain the death to a 3-year-old? Things like that. So it's a collection of that answer. And then it's almost like reading a Zen book. GPT-3 answers amazing questions to these difficult questions, amazing answers to these difficult questions. And it's reading like a Zen book. But then what makes me think about it is that it's not that GPT-3 is just fascinating. It's actually, if you think about how this happened, it's because there are a lot of humans in the human history wrote about this. They have experimented. They actually learned their wisdom from that experience and they wrote about it, right? That's what all these texts are. GPT-3 is just kind of spitting it out in a beautiful compositing way. It's doing a good job of it, but it's based on the human wisdom in the human history. And that's I think history of entrepreneurship too. So it just makes me think about what our connection to this technology these days and what it means actually to be human, and how this collective wisdom is so amazing. So that's the book that I want to somehow recommend. There's a podcast that I really have been enjoying recently more than before. It's called The Courageous Life. It's by Joshua Steinfeld. And he's a mindfulness teacher and also facilitator and has been running this podcast for 5 years, having great conversation with many thinkers, teachers. And what he's really focusing on is how can you stay courageous in difficult times, in any times too. And I'm mentioning this because for the conscious entrepreneurs, because a lot of things feel counterintuitive to what's known as entrepreneurship. So what we are trying to do as the conscious entrepreneurs might seem like counterintuitive to what entrepreneurship is viewed in society, right? So it requires extra courage for us to be who we want to be and then really stay grounded. I really recommend that podcast because it does provide a lot of good wisdom, and also he runs a practice and courage community too. So it's a good community to join.
Courage is certainly a very important word for entrepreneurs. You got to have it by the bucket load.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Yeah. Hey, Miroo, I'm so glad that you are taking people and culture out there and bringing it to the world and helping entrepreneurs along their journey. And you're a leading light to everyone. And I'm so glad that you were able to join us today on The Conscious Entrepreneur. So thanks for being here, Miroo Kim. And we really appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Likewise, everything back at you, Alex.
Thanks. We'll see you again soon.
See you. Bye.